The sun bled red that evening, spilling across the desert like a wound that would never quite close. It stretched over thorn and stone, bathing every crack of earth in a quiet sorrow, as if the land itself had grown tired of bearing witness. Two women sat bound to a crooked mesquite tree at the edge of nowhere. The older one, by minutes, not years, had her head bowed, dark hair matted to her cheek where a bruise bloomed like violet ink. Her arms were tied behind her, wrists rubbed raw by the rough hemp. Her sister beside her whimpered softly, the sound thin and broken, like a dying fawn. The ropes held their bodies still, but it was shame that bound their eyes to the ground. The air was dry and sharp, stinging their nostrils with dust. Coyotes watched from the ridge. Buzzards circled overhead, not yet close enough to touch, but waiting. The older sister whispered, her voice cracked but steady. "Don't fall asleep." Her sister stirred, eyes fluttering. "He'll come back. You know he will." "No," the older one said. "Not anymore. He's done with us." They didn't speak his name. Not because they feared it, but because it never meant safety. Their stepbrother had inherited the house, the cattle, and the land after their father passed. What he hadn't inherited was decency. He called them burdens. Unmarried. Childless. Useless. He said they were too old for hope and too soft for work. Then he hit them, once, twice, 3 times too many. The bruises never healed before the next ones came. Yesterday, he snapped. Said the devil had cursed his bloodline with barren women. Said the desert had better use for them than he ever did. He beat them and dragged them in silence to this place, far beyond the town's eye. Tied them like offerings to the sun. And walked away. The silence since had been louder than any scream. A wind picked up, carrying the scent of sagebrush and something else, leather, smoke, horse sweat. The older sister looked up, squinting past the sting in her eye. There, near the curve of the ridge, a figure sat still upon a black horse, barely visible through the orange haze. Wide-brimmed hat low over his face. Rifle slung over his back. He didn't move. Her breath caught. Someone's there. The younger sister raised her head. Is he back? No. The horseman remained a shadow, half-ghost, as if the desert had conjured him from memory. The women waited. Minutes passed like hours. Then he dismounted. Slowly. Deliberately. His boots sank into the sand with a crunch that echoed louder than thunder. He walked toward them without hurry, as though he had nowhere else in the world to be. As he drew closer, the wind shifted, brushing his coat around his legs like a curtain drawn back to reveal a man who had lived too long with ghosts. He stopped a few feet away. Looked down at them. His eyes were gray, not cold, but tired. The kind of tired that doesn't sleep away. He didn't speak. He simply reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a canteen, and knelt before the older sister. She didn't take it. He held it there, unmoving. "Why are you here?" she asked, finally. Her voice was hoarse, more breath than sound. He didn't answer. Just set the canteen down gently between them and turned his gaze to the rope at her wrists. His fingers were calloused and slow, not clumsy but careful, like someone handling a thing that could break. "You don't know us." Still no answer. "You don't want this trouble." He paused then, just a moment, and finally said, "Maybe I don't want what I've already had either." His voice was deep but quiet, like water moving beneath ice. The rope gave way. She gasped as blood rushed back into her hands, tingling fire. He freed the younger one next. She collapsed forward, but he caught her gently, easing her down without a word. The older sister rose on shaking legs. Her dress, once blue, was now dirt-stained and torn at the hem. She watched the man, unsure whether to run or stay. Where would she go? Back to town, where the doors had closed in their faces. Back to the house, where screams echoed off stone. The tree behind her still held the imprint of their suffering, bark dented where her spine had pressed. He looked at her then, not at her bruises, not at the dried blood, but at her eyes. And for a moment, she didn't feel like a ruined thing. "You got a name?" he asked, finally. She nodded slowly but didn't give it. He didn't push. "You got anywhere to go?" She shook her head. Her sister coughed behind her, too weak to speak. "I got room," he said. "Why?" He looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun kissed the sand before vanishing. "Because nobody else did." She hesitated. Then she picked up the canteen and helped her sister drink. When she looked up, the man had already returned to his horse, waiting with one hand on the reins. He didn't offer a hand, just watched. She lifted her sister in her arms, she was light now, far too light, and walked toward the horse. He didn't smile. Didn't speak again. Just reached down and pulled both women up behind him. The ride was long. The desert turned to dusk, then to night. Stars blinked open one by one, watching from above as 3 shadows moved across the sands, silent and slow. They reached the cabin just before midnight. It sat against a ridge, small and plain. Smoke drifted from its chimney like a lullaby. He carried the younger sister inside. The older followed. Inside was quiet, clean. A fire burned low in the hearth. A cot stood near the corner, beside a cradle made from hand-carved cedar. Dust lined its rim. The sisters said nothing. He brought water. Blankets. Stew that smelled faintly of beans and pepper. She fed her sister in silence. He stood at the door, watching the night. Later, when the younger one slept, the older stood near the fire, arms wrapped around herself. "You lost someone," she said. Not as a question. He nodded. "Me too," she said. He turned then, looking at her. Not surprised. Not sorry. Just understanding. They didn't speak again. That night, as she lay on a cot opposite her sister, she listened to the wind whistle across the desert. The ropes were gone, but her wrist still ached. She didn't know his name. But she knew this, he had seen her and not looked away. And for the first time in years, she didn't fall asleep afraid. The days that followed passed like wind through dry grass, soft, slow, and full of silences that said more than words ever could. The cabin stood like a lone hymn in the desert, its wood faded, its roof patched with care, its windows always open to the breath of the land. It was not a place of grandeur or noise, but one of quiet, like a heart that had been broken and learned to beat gently again. She woke with the light, always before her sister, always cautious. The ache in her muscles was familiar now, part pain, part memory. Her wrist still bore faint marks, thin and red, but healing. The first morning, she found a tin basin of water outside the door, steam still rising. A towel hung beside it, freshly washed. She looked around for him, but he was gone. Only the hoofprints in the sand said he had ever been there. Inside, her sister lay beneath a handmade quilt, cheeks no longer gray, breathing easier. A bruise still shadowed her collarbone, but color had returned to her lips. The room smelled of sage and cooked oats, a scent that belonged to safety. She brushed a strand of hair from her sister's forehead and stepped outside, letting the wind meet her face. He was in the distance, walking along the fence line, hammer in hand. Fixing what the desert and time had worn down. He didn't wave. She didn't call. But their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition without demand. She spent that day in silence. No expectations, no questions. Just watched, listened. The floorboards of the cabin creaked differently under her weight. The cradle in the corner remained untouched, but she found herself glancing at it now and then, wondering why it had never been moved, never covered. Her sister woke in the evening, voice dry but steadier. "Where are we?" "Safe," the older one said. "For now." That night, they ate stew again, beans, onions, a touch of wild mint. He didn't join them at the table but sat nearby, sharpening a blade with steady hands. When the younger one coughed, he fetched water without being asked. When the fire dimmed, he added wood without a word. "You live alone?" the older one asked. He nodded. "Always?" He paused. "Not always." She didn't press. Some stories arrive when they're ready. The second morning, she found a pile of chopped wood near the porch. She carried it in, one armload at a time. He didn't stop her. That afternoon, he left a folded shirt and trousers on the edge of the cot, men's clothes, yes, but soft, worn, clean. When she looked at him across the yard, he didn't explain. Just nodded once and went back to repairing the gate. Each day, she moved more. First through the cabin, then beyond it, walking along the edge of the dry creek bed, checking for snake holes, breathing the sun-baked air. Her sister began to hum again, soft and tuneless, but not sorrowful. She stitched a tear in the quilt one evening, hands steadier than they had been in weeks. The cabin had no mirrors, but the older sister began to feel herself returning. Still, questions stirred beneath the quiet. Why had he helped them? What did he want? The world she knew didn't give kindness without cost. It traded cruelty for coin, bruises for silence. But this man, he watched without staring, listened without asking. That made him harder to understand than anyone she'd ever met. One evening, after the wind had died and the horizon bled pale lavender, she found him sitting beside the barn, cleaning the mud from his boots. "I can't repay you," she said. "I didn't ask. That's the part one don't understand." He looked up then, meeting her eyes fully. The shadows on his face made him look carved from old stone, not hard, but weathered. "You don't have to understand. Just rest. That's all I got to give." She stayed there, standing for a long moment. Then she sat beside him on the wooden bench, keeping space between them, but no longer afraid of it. "What happened to your wife?" she asked. He didn't flinch. "She gave birth on a cold night. Wind tore through the roof. Baby didn't make it. She bled too long. I held her until she stopped breathing." "How long ago?" 6 winters. I counted them by the smell of the fire." She said nothing. Just sat, eyes on the fading sky. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded. Me too. That was the first time they shared silence not born of pain, but of understanding. She didn't need to explain her own losses. He'd seen them etched into her spine, heard them in her careful steps. The next day, she offered to help mend a broken fence post. He handed her the nails without argument. By evening, her hands ached, but her shoulders had straightened. I forgot what it felt like, she said, rubbing a splinter from her palm. What? To be useful and not afraid. He said nothing but passed her a cloth for the blood. Her sister, lighter in voice now, began to sit on the porch during the late hours. Hummed tunes their mother used to sing. Braided her own hair. Smiled once, only once, but it was enough to remind them both what hope looked like. One afternoon, as the sun leaned westward, a boy came riding from the edge of town. 10 years old, with dusty boots and an overgrown hat, carrying a sack of flour and news. He looked curiously at the sisters, then at the cowboy. You got company now, huh? The man only grunted. The boy grinned and handed over a folded scrap of paper, crudely drawn with charcoal. A stick-figure version of the man, the two sisters beside him, and a little house with smoke rising from the chimney. The older sister caught a glimpse of it before he tucked it away. Is that how you see us? She asked. He didn't answer. Just folded the paper and slipped it into his coat pocket. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in, sudden and strong. The sisters stayed awake by the fire, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. He walked the perimeter in the rain, checking the roof, the horses, the gate. He returned soaked but calm, like a man long used to storms. She met him at the door with a dry towel. He didn't thank her. But when she stepped away, she caught the smallest smile flicker at the edge of his mouth. They didn't speak again that night, but something had shifted, like a stone rolling just slightly from its resting place. Not an avalanche. Not yet. But something beginning. On the fourth morning, she found him carving something by hand, a sliver of cedar, sanded smooth. She asked him what it was. He didn't answer. By sunset, she saw it resting on the table. A bird, small, round, wings tucked against its side. Why a bird? She asked. He stared into the fire. Because they always return. Even after they fall. She picked it up. Held it like it was alive. That night, she placed it beside the cradle. The story hadn't asked for her love. Neither had he. But it was beginning to bloom, not through longing or touch, but through every act of quiet mercy, every hour spent without fear, every unspoken thing that filled the space between them. She still woke early. Still checked the basin. Still walked the lines of the fence. But now, when she passed him, her gaze lingered a little longer. And when he asked her that evening if she'd like to ride out with him the next day to check the cattle trail, she nodded once, then turned back toward the cabin. The cradle remained empty. But it no longer looked like grief. It looked like something waiting. And she, though she didn't say it, had begun to believe she might not be lost forever. The trail wound through scrub and silence, a ribbon of dust curling through open sky. She rode beside him, not behind, on a mare the color of wet ash. The saddle was worn but fit her right, and the reins felt like something she was meant to hold. Morning light dripped golden across the plain, softening the sharp edges of everything it touched. She hadn't spoken yet, not in the way that came easy. But she rode steady, spine tall, face turned toward the wind. The cowboy said little, pointing only when a fence post leaned or a hoofprint hinted at wolves. He never looked at her long. Just enough to make sure she was still there. They stopped by a split creek where water had once run fast but now sat in little pools, silent as mirrors. He watered the horses while she crouched beside a patch of sunflowers, heads bowed as though in prayer. I used to sing, she said suddenly, the words startling even herself. Her voice was rough with disuse but clear. I'd sing while doing laundry. When our mama was alive. And once in church. He didn't interrupt. Just waited, his shadow resting beside hers on the earth. But then the house went quiet. Singing felt wrong after that. Like I was mocking the silence. She plucked a dry bloom and rolled it between her fingers. He tied the reins to a mesquite branch and sat beside her, boots dusted, hat low over his brow. The pause between them wasn't empty, it was full of what wasn't said. You don't have to stop just 'cause it hurts, he said. She looked at him, surprised. I didn't stop because it hurt. I stopped because no one listened. He nodded, slow. Maybe you were singing for the wrong people. The quiet stretched again, not heavy, just real. She watched a beetle crawl over her boot. Her hands curled over her knees. Sometimes I think I'm not made for this world. Too stubborn for silence. Too soft for survival. He pulled a flask from his coat and offered it. Water, clean and cold. She drank. You survived a man who tried to unmake you, he said. That makes you more than soft. She smiled, just barely. Her fingers found the bird he'd carved, tucked in her coat pocket, worn smooth by her touch. Back at the cabin, her sister had begun baking again. The flour from town now became biscuits, lopsided but warm. Their laughter returned in pieces, quiet, uncertain, but real. The porch became their gathering place, each evening marked by the setting sun and a silence that no longer felt lonely. The townsfolk had begun to whisper. Some with pity. Others with judgment. But a few with curiosity. One afternoon, Widow May brought cloth and honey. Didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk. Just left them on the porch and nodded. That was the town's way of saying sorry, wordless and slow. Trouble came with a dust cloud. She saw it first. Standing by the peach sapling they'd planted near the cabin, her hand on the spindly trunk, feeling the bark still tender under her palm. 3 riders. One rode slouched, with arrogance in his spine. She didn't need to squint to know him. Her voice caught in her throat, not from fear, but from something deeper. Anger worn smooth with time. She walked inside. Didn't panic. Just leaned against the doorframe and said, "He's coming." The cowboy looked up from the table. He didn't move fast. Just rose, took his hat from the peg, and stepped outside. The sisters stood behind him. The stepbrother halted 10 paces from the gate. Same hat. Same cruel mouth. But thinner now. Wearier. Time hadn't been kind to him. He spat into the dirt and said, "You've been keeping what don't belong to you." The cowboy didn't answer. "They're mine," he said. "I got papers. Blood rights. You're interfering." "No one here belongs to anyone," the cowboy said. The stepbrother's eyes darted to the older sister. "You think this place'll save you? He's not your kin. He's just a lonely fool who carves birds and plays husband to what he can't keep." The insult didn't hit like it used to. She stepped forward, voice steady. "You left us for dead." He shrugged. "I figured someone might take pity. Or not." Her sister gripped her arm, but she didn't retreat. She looked her stepbrother full in the face and said, "I'm not yours. I never was." His mouth twitched. "You think you got a place in this world now? You think this man can give you something I couldn't?" The cowboy stepped between them, firm but calm. "She doesn't need to be given anything. She already is someone." For a moment, it seemed fists might fly. The other 2 riders shifted, hands near their guns. But the cowboy didn't reach for his rifle. He just stood, tall and still, like a mountain that couldn't be moved. The silence cracked. Then the stepbrother spat again. Turned his horse without a word. Rode off. He would return. Of that, none of them had doubt. But not today. That night, they sat inside. The storm outside was not rain but wind, howling through the cracks. She watched the fire, the way it danced without fear. She turned to him. "Why haven't you asked anything of me?" "Because I don't need anything from you." "Then why keep us?" He poked the fire once, let the embers glow. "Because the world needs people like you to stay alive." Her voice was low, hesitant. "I thought I'd never be safe again." He looked at her, not in pity, not in longing, but in full knowing. "You are now." She nodded, not because she believed it entirely, but because she wanted to. Later, she stood at the doorway, looking out at the desert. And then, soft as dusk, she sang. A low, quiet hum. Not a tune of joy, nor of sorrow. Just a thread of sound carried by the wind. Her sister turned toward her, eyes wide. The cowboy sat very still. The song didn't have words, just rise and fall, like breath made melody. When she stopped, the air felt warmer. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, her voice had come back to her. Not because anyone gave it, but because no one tried to take it. She was beginning to understand that survival wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The storm came before dawn, carried not in clouds but in the sound of hooves and men's voices. It rolled over the plain like thunder without rain, sharp, fast, final. She heard it before she saw it. The cadence of purpose. The rhythm of something that would not pass quietly. She was already at the hearth when the knock came, if it could be called that. It was more of a demand, 2 strikes of a fist against wood, and then silence. Her sister startled awake. The cowboy stood from the table, rifle already in hand. He didn't check the window. Didn't ask who. He knew. She moved to the side of the room, pulling her sister with her, heart pounding in her ears like war drums. The cabin felt smaller than usual. Not like safety, but like a box they'd outgrown. "Open up," came the voice. Familiar. Tainted by liquor and years of bitter hunger. "I got papers. I got law. I got what's mine." The cowboy didn't flinch. Just stepped forward and cracked the door an inch. "You got a minute to leave before this becomes something permanent." Laughter came from outside. More than one man now. The stepbrother wasn't alone. She heard boots crunch gravel. A gun cock. The storm had arrived not in rain, but in fury. "You think you're someone? You think you can steal blood from a man and hide her out here like a prize mare? You forget what's due you?" She watched the cowboy straighten, not with pride, but resolve. He didn't reach for anger. He didn't return insult for insult. He simply opened the door fully and stepped outside. She followed to the threshold, standing in the shadow where firelight met the dark. Her sister clung to her sleeve, but she didn't move back. 3 riders. Her stepbrother in the center, shoulders hunched, hat low. On his left, a man with teeth like broken glass and eyes that never blinked. On his right, someone younger, jittery, like a dog leashed too long. "This your last chance," the stepbrother said. "Give them to me, and I walk away." "No one here's yours to take," the cowboy said. The younger one laughed. She was always too proud for her own good. "Should have learned when you hit her the first time." The cowboy's rifle stayed low, but his eyes were harder now. She stepped forward. Past the door, into the open. Her sister whispered her name like a prayer, but she didn't stop. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said. Her voice carried, clear, steady, like wind cutting through rock. "I'm not something to own. I'm not a burden. I'm not a curse." Her stepbrother's lip curled. "You're nothing without my name." She shook her head. "I never needed it." He moved suddenly, off his horse, hand raised. Whether for gun or slap, she didn't know. But he reached. And that was enough. The cowboy stepped in one swift motion, rifle rising. "Don't," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a truth. The stepbrother froze, hand twitching. The other men shifted, waiting. "Let her go," the cowboy said again. "You've already lost." For a breathless moment, the desert stood still. Only the sound of wind. Only the smell of dust and old sweat. Then the stepbrother spat on the ground. Turned, without a word, and mounted again. The others followed. Slow at first, then faster. Like shadows retreating from light. When they were gone, she stood frozen. Not from fear, but disbelief. It had ended. Not in fire. Not in blood. But in choice. She turned toward the cowboy, breath shallow. "Why did you stand between us?" He looked at her. Really looked. "Because no one ever stood for you before." She swallowed hard. "You could have been hurt." He nodded. "But I wasn't." Her sister ran to her then, arms tight, tears falling. The moment broke open, relief crashing through them like spring water over stone. Later, the cabin glowed warm again. The door shut. The storm, for now, had passed. She sat by the fire, knees pulled to her chest. The cowboy knelt beside the hearth, poking at the coals. She studied him. "You could have sent us away that first night. Let someone else find us." He didn't look up. "I didn't want someone else to." She leaned forward. "You never asked for anything. Never touched me without cause. Never spoke when silence would do." "Why?" "Because I knew you weren't ready to be asked for." She took a breath. "What if I am now?" He paused. The fire cracked. The wind had gone quiet. He reached into his coat pocket. Pulled out the carved bird she'd held so many nights before. "This was for the cradle," he said. "I never finished it. Didn't think I ever would." She took it in her hands again, thumb brushing over the wing. "What made you change your mind?" He looked at her, steady and soft. "You did." She stood then, walked to the cradle. Set the bird inside it, like a promise. When she turned back to him, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't loneliness anymore. He crossed the room. Stopped an arm's length from her. "Will you marry me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't rush. Didn't cry. Just stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest, where his heart beat strong and slow. "Yes," she said. "Not because I need saving. But because you saw me when no one else did." The wind stirred again outside, gentle now, like the earth exhaling. In the months that followed, the tree by the porch bloomed its first white flower. The cradle found use. A baby's laugh echoed through the wood walls. But that night, as firelight kissed the old beams, the woman who had once been bound to a tree in the desert stood free in a place built not from timber, but from quiet love. And in that stillness, she sang again, not just for herself, but for all the women who had ever been silenced, forgotten, or left behind. The desert did not answer. But the stars did. And they stayed.